Pay attention to the science. The science is the most important thing in this case. The state wants you to believe that the DNA is everything. The science is going to be the most important thing in this case, and we're going to talk to you about the science. Pay attention to the medical facts that were given to you, but also pay attention to the integrity, which is the very essence, the integrity of this investigation. But you also saw something during the course of the trial that none of us might have expected. Something that should sadden us all. Something that maybe would anger us. On full display, you saw the lengths to which some, and only some, police officers will go to avoid admitting there were mistakes made in the investigation of Ms. Baker's case, to protect their own at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of Mr. Faust, who is an innocent man. Before we examine the evidence in this case, which we absolutely will do, we need to understand the very foundation of the entire system of justice in which we operate. It is the bedrock on which this entire system is built. Reasonable doubt. And that term, you all have heard it before, but this term isn't just legal jargon. It isn't just a technicality, and it's not a slogan. It is a constitutional shield that protects the innocent and prevents the government from punishing without proof. The state has the high burden to prove every single element of every single offense that they've charged Mr. Faust with. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, which simply means a doubt for which a reason can be given. Not a vague or arbitrary doubt, but a doubt based upon common sense and reasoning, as the state advised you. But I want to emphasize this because it sounds complicated, but it's very simple. It's a doubt for which a reason can be given. This doubt can be, and the judge will tell you this. What I'm about to tell you, you're going to hear the judge say the exact same thing. This doubt can be based upon a consideration of the state's evidence as a whole, a lack of evidence, or a conflict in the evidence. And those powerful words are not just some legal jargon. They're a mandate. They're your obligation. They're your community's protection against injustice. In our system of justice, Edrick Faust sits here today, presumed innocent. He's cloaked in the presumption of innocence, and it protects him like a suit of armor from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And that presumption is not fragile. It doesn't just disappear because there's a charge that comes about, or because somebody has a badge, or because the state has a theory. That presumption stands firm unless and until the state clears that high burden. The highest bar the law provides, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That means at the end of this case, at the end of this trial, you think about one or more of the charges. You think, you know what? Maybe that's true. It might be true what the state is saying. Then, if that's your feeling, you vote not guilty. If you think it's possibly true or probably true, your vote must be not guilty. If someone among you think it's likely true or even very likely to be true, your vote is not guilty, because none of those standards, maybe, might be, possibly, probably, likely, very likely. None of those meet the extraordinary burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt has best been explained two ways, in two different ways. One is pretty simple. We've already discussed the first way. It's a doubt for which you can state a reason. That's the simple. If you can state a reason for your doubt, that is the first definition of reasonable doubt. But that reason has to be based upon common sense and reason, right? We can't say an alien came down, committed this crime, and left evidence of Mr. Faust being there. That's fanciful. That isn't a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is based upon common sense and reason. So don't violate your oath and say, well, hey, I think it's a conspiracy theory. Some other people did it, and they're just snatching up Mr. Faust. Let me make that clear. Some other people that have not been mentioned in this case, some other people in another country, aliens, animals, whatever. That is not a reasonable doubt, because that wouldn't be based upon common sense and reason. But if you could state one reason, a reason to doubt the state's case, your verdict must be not guilty. Now, as a jury, you have rules and principles just like we have them in our homes and in our businesses. We also have them in court. So you find a truthful verdict within the confines of the law that is given to you by the honorable court. So if you want to say the state never presented evidence showing how Mr. Faust's DNA means rape, there's no physical evidence or witnesses connecting Mr. Faust to Ms. Baker's home. And also add the fact that Dr. Falzone, who testified here, told us based on the injuries to Ms. Baker's anus, she was sexually assaulted anally. Dr. Falzone told us that. And before I follow up with the evidence, I want to mention one thing that is very important. The judge will tell you that you cannot presume that Mr. Faust in any manner acted with criminal intent. The state has to present evidence of that. You can't just say, well, his DNA is present, that's enough for me. It's his DNA. Well, he didn't explain the DNA, so he's guilty. The state has to explain Mr. Faust's DNA. The state charged Mr. Faust with rape. So the state has to show you, how does his DNA mean rape? Otherwise, that presumes criminal intent, and it violates the oath you've taken to follow the law given by the honorable court. The judge will also tell you to convict Mr. Faust. Not only must the facts be consistent with Mr. Faust committing all of the acts in the indictment, but they also must exclude every other reasonable theory other than Mr. Faust's guilt. Chris Melton killing Ms. Baker is not only a reasonable theory, it is supported by the evidence. And I'll start with Ms. Ashley Hinkle. She was the last witness you heard from. You'll go to the last page on that. And again, no evidence came in about anybody running off, so I don't want you to consider that. You can't consider that. But this is what led us to say our case is where it needs to be. Ms. Hinkle, the states, this wasn't our DNA expert. This isn't somebody we hired. This isn't somebody we paid. This is somebody they brought in to support their case. Ms. Hinkle testified that DNA doesn't last in the anus for 5 days. And you may remember me asking her about the test where they had 5 swabs and they tested the 5 swabs and all 5 anal swabs came back negative. But at most, as we have, 3 days. And that's best case scenario. One, the journal said 2 days, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll say 3 days. and the state came before you and said, well, it's a drainage theory. It's a drainage theory. You even had Chris Melton, and you have to decide how he knows this. I don't know where he got it from, but well, I think I know where he got it from, but you have to decide where he got it from. He took the stand under oath and said, well, my DNA was there probably because of drainage. But this is the issue with the state's drainage theory. If we concede, I don't agree with it, but you have to decide what's truthful and what's not truthful. But if we concede that Mr. Melton was with Ms. Baker on Sunday and DNA only lasts 3 days, his DNA would have been gone by Wednesday. So for Ms. Baker to be killed on Friday and Mr. Melton's DNA to show up, it doesn't fit the physical evidence. It doesn't fit the science. And you may have heard the state ask a question, well, does the clock reset? And you heard Ms. Hinkle say, yeah, but it will require penetration. So if it requires, number one, it wouldn't be there, but let's say hypothetically, it requires penetration. Whose DNA profile was the only identifiable DNA profile in Ms. Baker's anus? It was Chris Melton's. So even if you take Mr. Melton's theory, even if you try to give him the benefit of the doubt, it doesn't match the science. And you actually heard Elizabeth Bigham say that. We have to explain your DNA. It doesn't make sense. The issue is Ms. Bigham went to a lab way out in California. You heard the young lady come in, Ms. Lacone. She was very honest. She said, well, I've never been asked to testify about this. This is a presumptive test. Both of these tests are presumptive tests. This is her first time coming into court. Based on what she said, she has not been called in court to testify about this science at no other time. But what Ms. Bigham does, when Mr. Melton wouldn't change his timeline, she changed it for him. And this is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. If you'll go to the paper before. I don't know if I wrote this down, but let's see. This is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. So what Ms. Hinkle told us is that DNA in the mouth at longest lasts 24 hours, at longest. So when Ms. Bigham was meeting with Chris Melton saying, hey, we need to explain this because we need to put it on bad guy, we need to explain it because we need to go after the one we want, she knew when Chris Melton was saying, hey, I didn't see her the day before, hey, I didn't see her 2 days prior, hey, I didn't see her that week, that was a problem for their theory. It was a big problem because she wants Mr. Faust, whose DNA was at one time was only in the mouth. But she has a problem because Mr. Melton's DNA is in the mouth at that time and the anus. So she doesn't go to a lab in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina. We're on the East Coast. And we don't know how many labs she went to. We don't know how many times she tried to get this stuff tested and tried to get the opinion she wanted. Maybe she was expert shopping. That evidence didn't come in. We don't know. But we do know they flew someone all the way from California on taxpayer dollars to testify about these tests where this young lady says it's presumptive. This is a presumptive test. This is the evidence they brought you. And the reason they brought you that evidence is because they had to take Chris Melton out of the mouth. But they forgot about the anus. They forgot about the anus. In fact, the state didn't even ask about the anus. If you notice, when they presented their case, they just said mouth and vagina. Is that searching for the truth? The elected district attorney came up here and said, our job is to find the truth. I've given you good and bad facts on our side. Is that searching for the truth? Where you only ask questions in the same manner that Elizabeth Bigham asked questions, whereas to put everything on Mr. Faust. The science does not support that Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker. The science, the timeline supports Chris Melton. He's continuously lied. Even Elizabeth Bigham had to admit, yeah, I told him it wasn't consistent with what he said 23 years ago, or for the last 23 years. When have you ever in your life, whether it's on television or any experience you've ever had, known law enforcement to tell someone, look, it's not consistent with what you've been telling us, but let me offer a suggestion of what you should say. You've never heard of that. You've never heard of that. If you weren't in this courtroom, you wouldn't believe it. If somebody told you outside that, hey, I heard about this case, the lead detective is telling the individual to lie so they can put it on somebody else, you'll say, no way. This guy's nuts. He doesn't know what he's talking about because it sounds so unbelievable. But what doesn't lie is the science and the physical evidence. You heard their expert, not my expert, their expert talk to you about the timelines. I also want to talk about the anus as well. How is it possible that Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy? He doesn't leave his DNA, but he leaves Chris Melton's DNA. How does that make sense? Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy for anally sexually assaulting Miss Baker, but somehow, some way, he doesn't leave his DNA. He leaves Chris Melton's DNA. That was supposed to be gone because according to Chris Melton, he hadn't seen her since Sunday. That's the question that you all, as jurors, have to answer.